Thanks for coming. My name is Mark Cannella, University of Vermont Extension. I'm a farm business specialist. I've been doing business planning in Vermont for a little over 10 years with all sorts of farms. And for the past 5, I've been spending more time with maple producers, doing a lot of in-depth work, specifically doing cost analysis work. I see some familiar faces in the room, which is good. I always tend to try to probably prepare a little bit more information than I should pack in an hour, but I get excited to share with folks what I've been able to pick up from having individual meetings with people, producers, packers, policymakers. I'm all over trying to talk to people and absorb what's going on, so I try to share that. And but I would like to say, please ask questions as we go. If I want to move forward, I'll just say no more questions, I'm going to move forward. But this is really a great chance for you all to be in a room together. A lot of stuff going on in the industry, a lot of conversations about policy and risk. So I think it's a good place for people to share comments if you're willing to, or ask questions, because that'll help us all kind of grow together and understand where we're moving together, or where we might have some tension. I'm gonna plug some programs and some paperwork before I really get into the industry trends. This is all going to work. We get a lot of grant funding, part of the game. That's actually one more piece of paperwork I think I've got. No, it's up here. This is my reminder. I hate doing this, but I hate doing it, but I love the results. If you're willing to, I got a 1-page evaluation. There's 3 questions on it. If you could fill this out and leave it at the end when you walk out, this is what keeps these people happy and allows me to be back next year. There should be a lot of extras of these, so maybe if you get a stack in the back, can I start one on this side with you? Just leave a pile, because I'm going to use them in the afternoon.
I'll fill out 2 if you want me to.
Send my thank you note back to you on a $5 bill. We do get funding. We get some funding from the state of Vermont too, so think what you want about the state, but they're allowing us to do programs like this, and we're really grateful for them. Maple Benchmark Program. At the end of this presentation, I'll share some specific financial information from our work for the past several years. We've been tracking finances with a small group of producers for a few years now. I've got reports up here that I'll leave, and people can grab them on the way out. My website is on a lot of paperwork too, and you can get them all online. But this is a 2016 benchmark report, about 15 producers. We try to break down where they're at, cost of production, and share that information back to the community. That one's there. And then to go with that, I've got a Maple Benchmark Assistance and Business Planning sheet. Part of my job is to find more producers that want to participate in that benchmark program. We are looking for more larger producers, over 10 to 15,000 taps. That doesn't mean we can't find a way to work with folks smaller. We've got a lot of different programs around the state for business planning. But this is another sheet. You can leave it here if you want to fill it out, or you can just mail it back. All my contact info is on there. And the cool thing is people took notice of this benchmark work, so we're taking it across New England this coming year. I'm a little scared about that because it's not easy work, but Maine and New York and New Hampshire have shown there's some interest. Oh, there we go. We're going to take that program to a couple other states. So get into it now in Vermont before all these people from Maine start to pull us away to travel. Business planning. This is something that I've been doing in Vermont. The Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, in partnership with a lot of nonprofits and UVM Extension, has been doing business planning for all sorts of farms. Not that many maple producers have utilized this program in the past 10 years that I'm aware of, but maple producers are fully eligible to participate. If you're looking or would like to work with an individual business planner, one-on-one work to do a business plan, this program is available. And I've got some cards up in the front there that say UVM Extension Farm Viability. It's a particular type of programming that matches you with a business coach. And we've been seeing great results. People learn a lot about their business. People pretty successful in getting applications to lenders if you're looking to borrow money. And in general, I think one of the biggest take-homes is people are more satisfied with their business after they work with a third-party planner and talk the talk about the issues, problem solve. They just come around to being a little more satisfied with what they're doing within their business structure, which is great. Even if you don't change profitability necessarily, people just feel more comfortable. Taking some anxiety out of an agricultural business has value. So there's some cards up there that say liability. And then a preview for this afternoon, I'm going to be doing a 1-hour business plan after lunch, and then I'm also going to be doing a clinic in the late session. We're putting together a series of online calculators that aren't quite ready yet online, but I'll in the afternoon I'm going to show and tour some of the static versions that are just on spreadsheets. But we're going to put some of these online, and people are going to be able to access them to do like average yield calculations, crop yield forecasts. Got a really cool sales forecast calculator. Even if you're bulk and you want to see how your crop spreads across 3 or 4 different grades at $2.20 a pound versus $2.10 a pound, you can run a forecast that way. You could also run a retail wholesale forecast. I think it'll take 20 different product lines. You could piece it out between pints and 40 mils and half gallons and put your own prices in to see what your sales forecast will be. And these are all going to stack together, and in a couple months we're actually going to have an online business planning tutorial where you can do some calculators and then work on your own business plan. So that'll be available. They're not available online yet, so there's no website to share, but come in the afternoon if doing like a pricing calculator is interesting. I'll tour that. All right, and this is the last one. This was pretty good news. Myself and Mark Iselhart, you might see him around. He was on the microphone earlier this morning. We got this Acer development grant. Want to make people aware of it because you may get a survey in the next several months as a maple producer. You may get a survey if you're a forestry professional or if you're like a land manager. But you'll definitely see programs the next 3 years. I'm going to be working on the business stuff. I'll mention the silvicultural guidelines. That's Mark's deal. He'll be working with forestry professionals to look at really the best practices in the woods under modern maple production. I can't explain it better than that, other than a lot's changed in the maple industry, but the silvicultural guidelines haven't necessarily changed. And even the forestry professionals have something to learn about non-timber related products, being maple syrup and maple sap. So Mark will be moving that thing forward, and you'll hear more about that. I'm going to be working on the business side. I'll keep doing finance work, but I'm actually going to be doing a lot of work on the legal aspects of running a business. Looking a little bit at taxation, and then definitely spending a lot of time looking at maybe legal templates like multi-party agreements, whether it's sap sales, whether it's contracted syrup prices, unique business partnerships, if you're going to work with 2 or 3 different people on establishing a business entity. So we're going to try to get ahead on the legal resources on the hunch that as this industry continues to evolve, there are going to be people that come to the conclusion that rather than go at their own and have their own individual brand and their own individual farm, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people to collaborate, buying sap from people, co-marketing with people, and inevitably there'll be some legal agreements and some protections that we think people are going to want to have to keep everybody honest and to, inevitably to reduce the risk. So watch out for that. Okay, now we're going to get into some trends. For the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit macro, a little bit big picture, a little statistics, and then what I'll try to do is bring it down to the producer level and talk about finances and cost of production. These are things. How many people were here in the previous session, so I can get a set of hands? All right, cool. 2 in a row. 2 in a row in economics. Good. We started to talk about things like supply and demand and cost of production really kind of loosely in the last session, so my goal is to really get specific on those things in the next hour. Okay, here's a trend. We got the yellow line on top is the United States, not including Vermont, and then the green line is Vermont. So a quick chart to show you the continued expansion of, this is taps, United States taps and Vermont taps. You can see we're continually growing. I think somewhere around 10% plus or minus tap growth every year. People are putting in more taps, producing more syrup. Well, I'll say that a tap in Vermont is not equal to a tap in New York or a tap in New Hampshire, and that's important to know. Units of analysis are always important. Taps are going in all over the country. Whether you're from Vermont or not, in this place right now, in this section of Vermont, some of the most productive sugar bushes are in operation. Some of the most productive managers and systems are in operations. This is not the case in other parts of the country. When I go to Pennsylvania and I mention a half a tap or 5 to 6 pounds per tap, people look at me like I'm cross-eyed. They look at me cross-eyed. That's more common around here, but you go to other parts of the country, they're not producing syrup at the same yields we are. So here's the tap numbers. Maple syrup production. This one goes back to 1992 on the scale all the way to 2018. These are U.S. Census statistics. Most people will say that they're underreported. And I think from people that I've talked to that sell tubing or sell taps, they could say these are definitely underreported because they know how much product's going out there. But the trends are still helpful to absorb, right? We are in a growth industry. I don't think this is news for everyone. This is total syrup production. I think it's always helpful to see the ups and downs, to know that this is an agricultural situation. It's weather dependent, and we're going to have ups and downs. I will say, however, though, from the producers that I've worked with in our benchmark work that have high vacuum systems and are pretty serious about tubing management, people are leveling out the classic up and down of a good year and a bad year. But do people remember 2012? Yeah, where were you on March? Yeah. Who knows the date?
Yeah. I'm trying to boil into wrestling.
March 8th, someone knows the date, March 18th, 2012.
Yes.
Like, even under high vacuum systems, people think we've managed some of our own production risk. There is always the potential of a fluke season like that, and that kind of potential means like disaster, not a marginal drop in production. We're not talking about missing a couple of days. We're talking about missing a season. And then I think to emphasize that point, about how many production days do you all have in a typical maple season? 200 production days? 100 production days? 50 production days? 25 production days? I heard the magic number. I was with 14 is the number that I've been heard. Somewhere between 15 and 20. So we still need to embrace the idea of an annual sales forecast that's compressed in possibly 15 to 20 active production days. I'll add, how many days do you market syrup? Do you market syrup for 15 or 20 days? No. Thank goodness there's people in this room and in this conference that market syrup 365 days a year. So let's not lose sight with marketing and we start just looking at production. Here's the trends though. I think, last year or the year before, we hit one of our highest U.S. production yields in recent history. That's not going back into the 1800s. I don't know how they did it, but I'm assuming it was a lot of horses and a lot of kids that collected that sap and a lot of buckets. We're nowhere near the U.S. production of 100 years ago, but in recent history, we're high. Same thing again, just looking at the blue bars, those are the taps, and then the black bars, the production, knowing that black bar is always going to fluctuate a little bit more, but the taps are going up. So, industry growth. This is more U.S. statistics. We've got some states on the left: Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Minnesota, and Connecticut. And then the different colors are how that syrup, the crop in each state gets sold. So all of Vermont's crop gets sold in 3 ways: bulk, wholesale, and retail by this chart. And you can see that over 80% of the Vermont crop goes out the door as a bulk sale, goes out in a barrel, moved to another handler that then moves that product. And then far less than 10% gets either retailed or wholesaled in Vermont. Context, important for people to know, but also to think about what's going on in other states. So let's pick a state like Minnesota, second up from the bottom there. Roughly 80% of the syrup in Minnesota goes out retail. The Minnesota crop is nowhere near the Vermont crop. I think it's like percentage points. But a different dynamic and a different group of producers they're starting to access the market in different ways. In New York, I find interesting. New York's kind of more of like a balance. They're definitely bulk, but there's a lot more retail and wholesale going on in that state. I think the obvious dilemma that Vermont's going to be facing, and probably you all feel this, as the production grows, it's getting more and more difficult to market syrup locally. And there's not that many people here, and there's a lot of syrup here. So we're really becoming, or we have been, a maple syrup exporter, and I think we'll probably continue to feel that pressure. And those are all the states that you're probably going to start knocking on.
Yeah.
On the similar tone, to get a sense of the dynamic of, you know, who's in the room, who's in the state, compared to if we went to Minnesota or Connecticut, when you take all that crop and you spread it across bulk prices and wholesale and retail, we get approximately a $30 a gallon blended price for Vermont crop in 2016. And if we took one of those states that are heavy in direct retail, again, a really small amount of syrup, but from a like an aggregate perspective, Minnesota 65, Connecticut $69 a gallon. These are really chunky numbers. These aren't going to look like the same as your own cost accounting at your own business or your own sales records at your own business. It just gives you that dynamic across the U.S. I was up in northern Minnesota earlier this fall and got to talk to more people from Wisconsin as well. And they don't have a lot of syrup, but they do have a pretty reasonable woods resource in certain places. So Vermont, I think, is still one of the best places to make maple syrup. We've got a long identity, but there are other states in this country that are certainly looking to make syrup. I think they're a long way off, but let's not ignore that those states exist and they'll be around. Okay, I don't think anyone this morning was going to venture on that market price question that Mark threw up, you know, that nice softball of what the market price is going to be. But we've seen, I think a lot of us have seen this before. The red line is the Canadian price as controlled by the Federation, a group of producers that have all agreed by law to collectively market their syrup, and they have stabilized their prices. So the red line is Canadian syrup, and it gets cut off. It's just around $2.95 to $2.96, I think, in Canadian dollars. The blue line is the U.S. line. We're running from 1998 to 2018. And then that currency adjustment rate is that green line. Several years ago, in my world, I was not watching currency adjustment rates, but then I began to when this thing started to shift, when the Canadian dollar softened with petrochemical industry situation globally. Things changed. The U.S. dollar was stronger in comparison to the Canadian dollar. And then we started to see this downward pressure on U.S. prices to stay at par with Canada. And we'll look at some of the percentages in a second. This one comes from Tim Perkins at Procter. I don't know if this is exactly the statistical spread across all of bulk syrup across the U.S., but it's a good trend again. Okay, Canada's leveling out its prices. U.S. is kind of following that. Canada makes 70 to, I think, over 80% of the global supply of syrup. They're sort of in charge in some ways. Okay, we're gonna get a little bit into observations and maybe a little bit of opinion and a little bit of me kind of guessing. But you know, this is how I see the industry as it dictates bulk market price. We've got a small number of U.S. bulk buyers, and I think that number is growing and will continue to grow. But we definitely have a few anchor people that have really brought this industry to where it is today. And then we've got the Quebec Federation. Well, you know, what do they think about? The U.S. bulk buyers, I'm sure they're looking at sales trends and supply forecasts. They're trying to guess how much syrup they can sell. They're trying to guess if they can sell a little bit more every year, to whom they're going to sell it to. And they're certainly looking at the supply forecast because the few that I know have a lot of long-term relationships with producers, and they value those relationships, and they're also trying to understand if that relationship is going to produce more syrup the next year, if people are expanding or not. So they're gauging that. There's competition. There's always competition. This is business. The currency exchange rates, we keep hearing that over and over again. I think 3 years ago, there was a really clear line between the U.S. dollar and Canadian dollar exchange rate and the U.S. bulk prices dropping. And then we did hit a little blip. I think it was pre-2017 crop, where it was really clear that the currency rates were starting to change a little bit, but the bulk maple price wasn't shifting. So it seemed like it got away from strictly a currency adjustment. I'm not a bulk buyer, but I'm going to guess maybe two things. I'm going to guess that bulk buyers have to make a call about once a year on what their price is going to be. This isn't like pork bellies that get traded every 48 hours. This is something that like a call is made at some point. And the other thing I'll say is that it's not exactly clear like what the crop will be. So whether there's a little bit of hesitation or there's a little concern that it's going to be a strong crop year, the few number of buyers could certainly maybe make a call one way or the other that isn't going to follow that currency adjustment rate exactly. But I think it's fair to remind people, with respect to the bulk buyers, that there's no rule that it has to follow the currency adjustment rate at all, right? So when people started to say, oh, it's not following currency adjustments, like, well, okay, good observation. Nobody's trying to take advantage of everybody, but let's just not think that there's any golden rule that's going to have to follow it. I do know that those bulk buyers are trying to find a way to compete with a lot of Canadian syrup, and we'll look at the percentages in a second. So U.S. market on one side, we've got trying to balance supply and demand, trying to deal with this Canadian import issue. And then on the Quebec side, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but not too much. They're going to do inventory and supply forecast as well. They also have a controlled system where they're controlling their production to step in line with where they think their market and their inventory is. So it's very different than the U.S. system. They're doing forecasts, and they're definitely in a situation of global market share. Over 75 to 80% of the global syrup puts them in a certain position. I think this morning David Hall said that, 5 million taps were released, 5 million new taps on Canadian quota, and it was a good question today of how much of that syrup has hit the market, and I believe he said, maybe 60% of those taps, 66% of those taps that were released have hit the market. I think it's fair to wonder if the U.S. production continues to grow, at what point, I'm not going to say if, it's more like when will the Quebec Federation decide it's in their best interest to release 5 million new taps. I don't think they're going to be excited about losing global market share if they don't have to. So I wouldn't think it's an if, it's just kind of a matter of when. And we should be aware of that and be aware of where we are in the.
When they talk about global share, are they talking about other countries? Because I was under the impression that a lot of that syrup was coming into the States.
Yeah.
Oh,
So global market share in the sense that if we looked at all the syrup that was produced in the globe, over 75% of that syrup comes from, and I gotta maybe correct myself, I say Quebec, I don't even know, I think it is 75% is Quebec, plus another several percent that's from Canada.
Ontario.
Yeah, non-federation syrup. And then the U.S. is maybe a quarter or a little less than a quarter of the global production. So just production. And the assumption is that that production is then sold. So if I say market share, it's like that syrup's going somewhere. But I really can't speak to how much that Canadian syrup is then kind of moving through U.S. firms. I don't get into that with my work. Okay, but you made the connection. So now let's look at U.S. maple consumption. 2015, a little bit old. I don't have any reason to think this pie has changed at all. Red is Canadian production that's consumed in the U.S., and the blue is the U.S. production consumed in the U.S. So 56% of the U.S. syrup consumption is Canadian syrup imported into this country. We do not yet make enough syrup to supply our own domestic demand. Is that news for anybody? Okay. You got a lot of eyes in New York. They were like, "What? Really? There's that?" Okay, so this is me kind of as air quotes extension economist. I'm more of a farm business person that works with producers, and then I try to connect some dots. This is kind of where I see things going. We've still got a small number of U.S. bulk buyers. We've got the anchors, and my guess is while we're looking at a lot of niche products and product innovation at the small business level, my guess is that the U.S. bulk buyers are trying to find a new mass product, trying to find something, whether it's just a different type of packaging or it's a totally different format. They're trying to find something that will not penetrate niche markets, but something that can be spread across the base of U.S. consumption. And fair to ask if it's going to be table grade syrup, and we're going to stick with that, or if we're really trying to look at beverage products or some other format that's a little bit in a different section of the food sector. my world, as again an ad hoc economist, my gears go towards medical and healthcare systems. I mean, that's driving the U.S. economy. So my question is there some sort of product that could either fit in the healthcare industry, whether it's consumed as a food product or it's some weird thing that gets used to, I don't know, medical devices or medical sanitation or anything like that. Who knows? Maybe a little cultures in like laboratories. I don't know. But that's, I'm kind of, I follow the money. Healthcare industry is a lot of money going that way. But I think new product development and then import substitution. And I was a little nervous in New Hampshire when I said this, and all the people in the Quebec Federation were sitting over here. And I talked to them after, and they said, no, we get it. You all are trying to take the piece of the pie back into your favor. And we'll talk about international trade in a second to see if we have any other options. But I think the understanding is that we're trying to supply more of our domestic need internally, and that's probably where the U.S. is headed. So the Quebec Federation is still going to have impact on market price with their presence. We know that they're still the global producers. I'm kind of waiting for like a U.S. bulk producer co-op. I see a lot of the distinctions between smallholder firms that have great ideas but don't have capital, don't have economies of scale, don't have leverage, don't have just that push. So I'm waiting to see like, maybe not like 5 producers, but more like 500 producers try to do something under a cooperative label, some sort of cooperative brand where they can maybe leverage trucking, distribution, warehousing, even get discounts on their tubing and taps because of their volume. I'm kind of guessing that's what a lot of other industries have done. And then especially bulk buyers, this is where I think there's a lot of the growth. There's the people that are targeting markets that are not the same markets or not the same volumes that some of the traditional bulk packers have targeted. I can't say if those are profitable or good markets to go into, but they're happening now. Different types of syrup, different types of sales, different consumer relationships. So I see a lot of other big producers that are either buying syrup or they're somehow aggregating supply from a sap perspective or syrup or finished product, and they're moving it through. And I think we'll see more of that. When I do cost analysis, it's no surprise that when people look at the cost and they think, I get $2.20 a barrel or $2.20 a pound selling a barrel to this person, but there's somebody that called me from some other state that's got some weird idea, and they're willing to buy my syrup for $2.60 a pound. Now, we don't know if that good idea is going to last, but at this point, there's a lot of producers who are saying, I wouldn't mind selling a few barrels at $2.60 a pound. The question is going to be if those markets are going to stick and how much risk there is. But they're coming up, and I think it's great. I think it's good. It's more competition, more. Okay, so let's think about that pie. 55% Canadian, 45% U.S. That's the U.S. consumption. So we should go international. I came in a little late to the panel this morning. I don't know if this got talked about. Tariffs came up, but here's some specifics. Trans-Pacific Partnership, the U.S. is, I think, explicitly out. Last I heard somebody else's tweets. So we can expect, if you're the U.S. and you were thinking about trying to get syrup into Japan, which is actually, kind of a growing or a strong economy. 17% tariff on U.S. syrup in Japan. Anyone want to guess if Canada is participating in the TPP? I believe they are. Does anyone want to guess if, as a member of the TPP, Canada's syrup will have a 17% tariff as it enters Japan? No, it will not. That's something to consider when we're thinking about Canadian syrup and where we're going to market. There's this other agreement called the CETA, the Canadian EU agreement. Canada happens to have a trade partnership with European Union countries, which include England, which happens to speak English. That's convenient for trade. And then I think Germany is probably on that list of, 4 or 5 in global syrup consumption. Definitely in the top several of the countries that consume syrup. U.S. is not a part of that agreement. U.S. has no beneficial tariff agreements. Canada does, 8%. There's a couple bulk producers in this whole event today. You could just go and ask them how they feel about making up 8% or 17% on margin to a competitor and see, get their pulse. And then there's this tariff thing. We've had this new U.S. tariff strategy, which is this is an observation I've made. I've talked to several people. They're experiencing or expecting some increased packaging costs, whether it's glass, whether it's unique kind of retail packaging. And then we heard the gentleman from Leader this morning talking about equipment costs. So be prepared for that, whether it's coming through in finished manufactured goods or some of the inputs that go into those things. This is a factor that's going into the system that we all have to be aware of. So I guess I'll be pretty clear in saying it would be nice if the U.S. could expand global export of syrup to move supply, but I think there are certain situations right now that might make it challenging, which again will redirect us back to our own markets. And I don't know how that's going to play out with the Quebec Federation. I don't think we have to decide that today, but I think domestic sales is probably going to be the way to go for the near future. I would like to talk about this, and I think I'll say that in the past 6 months of trying to present neutrally to audiences in a few different states, I'm coming around more to a place where I can feel comfortable saying, really what I think. I don't think that the U.S. is going to adopt a quota or supply management system anytime soon. I don't know whether we should or shouldn't, but I don't think we're going to. But I would venture to say that it could be really a great idea for the U.S. producers to collectively consider market orders or some sort of contribution to sell maple syrup, to promote maple syrup. In the absence of supply or managing the supply of our syrup, we certainly could make some investments collectively on selling it. And it's something that's offered within the U.S. agricultural law that you can form a market order. There's 34 active market orders for specialty crops in the United States. Has anyone ever heard of Vidalia onions before? Can you think of any logical reason why you'd know the region that a certain onion was produced? Has anyone ever heard of Florida orange juice before? No. Because last I checked, orange juices grow all over the world, or oranges grow all over the world. These are market orders. In effect, these are industries where people have gotten together, contributed money to market and promote their product. I mean, I hate to say dairy, but dairy actually has a market order as well. So it's not necessarily a grand slam. But a market order is something that can be formed. It will take a lot of leadership. I don't know if this is an if or when or could, but within the U.S., people have done that. Market orders, you establish a fee or an assessment that gets applied to any unit as it moves through the order, and then those funds then get put into a pot of money, and the leaders that organize the order will then decide how that gets distributed. It could go to research. If you're feeling like there needs to be more maple research in this country, that's one avenue. It could go to promotion. It could go to U.S. promotion. It could go to Vermont promotion if the Vermont producers decided they want to do a market order. It could go in a lot of different ways. My plans for this year is to go to Oregon to visit the Hazelnut Growers Association, because the hazelnut industry, or filberts as some might know, is about a $250 million industry, which is kind of similar to maple syrup in some ways. They have a market order, they have grower cooperatives, and they're working effectively to try to get that product marketed as a group. I guess I'll just ask, anybody feel like a market order might have potential in the United States?
I'd like to see it. Whether it actually happen.
Anybody want to go on the record of saying, I think it's just an awful idea, and here's your 10 seconds to tell us all why it's an awful idea? Would you go on to share why you think it's a bad idea?
The main reason I like the maple industry when I started was it lacked regulation and oversight and everybody telling you how you could do what you could do. But apparently it's going to happen whether I like it or not.
Yeah. Well, this isn't necessarily going to happen. Some of the other regulation, right? We talk food safety, probably going to happen whether you like it or not. Probably has been happening. The question is, have you been paying attention to it? Yeah. This pushes and pulls on people in a lot of different ways. Political philosophy, independence, just administrative burden. Regulations are tough.
It's all record keeping.
Yeah. Records.
Takes all the fun out of it.
Yeah, put $20,000 in your back pocket. You can tell me that's fun. Yeah.
I just wanna mention, there was one thing you were talking on the trade policies and stuff.
Yeah.
Talking about the tariffs. I do a lot in specialty stuff,
Yeah.
and the hardest thing I had this year was, first of all, everybody went into panic about the tariffs, and I ended up getting in arguments with the people I was buying from. And I ended up buying a huge amount of bulk stuff. I felt like I was trying to fall off the baskets at that rate. But anyway, we were, the hardest thing we had was trying to keep up with that. And a lot of the guys I was dealing with, I was buying especially baskets like 7,000 and 10,000 at a time and stuff like that. They were trying to jack me up $1, $2 on a basket, you know, when originally we were about $3 a basket. So of course, when you've already made a contract with somebody else, that kind of hurts.
Yeah.
So we were buying a lot of it in bulk like that. But the big thing was, when it all came down to it, really you gotta get right after them because some of that didn't happen at all. So it got done. One guy was really serious. He was trying to get us for like almost $2 on this basket. By the time I got done, it went up like 20 cents. So you gotta watch them. Like
So you're saying that when there's policy change, something like that, then there's going to be a response, some pricing adjustments.
Yeah, all those
But-
crying in to try to find a way to jack the price up. When I got done, things came right down fast again. So it was kind of interesting. I know glass is getting ready to take a big jump again. That's what they were saying.
That's what I've heard from a few people, whether they either had it or they're expecting it.
A lot of glass is now starting to come out of China, so that kind of hurts. Because we don't have any New Hampshire, the United States produces for like 8-ounce bottles.
Yeah.
It's all coming out of China now. So,
I think everyone's aware of all the stuff going on with policy. I think that the basic term is uncertainty. When things are uncertain or there's a policy change, then people, they either pivot, they go to protect, they try to cover risk in different ways, and sometimes it's difficult to know how it all shake out. But it definitely has an impact on people.
it does. The other thing I found interesting too, a lot of my research I've been doing, getting involved in stuff I really want, but it's interesting in Japan anyway. They have a thing about United States syrup. I don't know if you realize that. They feel that Canadian syrup is actually a better quality syrup, hence they rarely ever buy anything from the United States. They prefer it to be Canadian-made syrup. So we were having a hard time getting into that market in Japan anyway,
Yeah.
prior to all this going on. But
Yeah.
it's really watching everybody right now because I think a lot of these companies are actually trying to make an extra buck out of you real quick too. That's what I found out. If you put the scare of the tariff out there, they jump it right up real fast. When all of a sudden comes back on the news, it's not happening. I was like, oh wow, now we got to get you back. And so we ran into that a lot this year.
Yeah, good input. Anybody else have any comments? And I think we're going to start to switch. I'm going to shift to talk a little bit about cost of production, but I do want to take a moment. We know the syrup production's going up in this country. We know the tap numbers are going up in this country. We're all trying to find a way to sell that syrup. I think, thank goodness, the people that have been really leading the marketing charge have been able to grow markets 10 to 15% a year. We haven't seen a major price drop. We've seen the Canadian currency adjustments put some competitive pressure, put downward pressure on U.S. packers trying to meet that demand across the U.S. We know that half the syrup in the U.S. comes from Canada, so there will be that pressure for now to always stay on par with the Canadian currency at least. We're not at $2.90. We're not at $3 a pound anymore bulk. We're still above $2. I haven't heard anything about organic premiums yet. I don't know if it came up. Did that come up this morning at all? In the pricing? Okay. I do know a lot of producers have certainly made that a transition to organic. They felt good about it. They felt good about having that premium. And we'll talk about market pricing a little bit with producers. Yeah.
For the active markets that are open now, perhaps an explanation of how it's affected them and so on and so forth. I mean, we see that there's 34 active market orders out there, but we don't really have any information on how it's affected them or their products or the people that are putting it together.
It's a great question.
In the future.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to do is just to look at all the assessments that are happening on oranges and onions and everything, and figure out kind of what percentage of the farm gate price that is. Is it a decimal of a percentage of that price, or is it 1 or 2% to get a sense of how much potentially is coming out? And then the other thing you mentioned too is like how effective is it? And I think the question that I'm going to ask when I look into these market orders is like maybe not, I think trying to figure out if we're looking for the market price of a product to go up or if we're just looking for the product to stay relatively consistent. And I hear this a lot from producers and business owners. You know, if prices were to go up, they're aware this price is already, it's a luxury product, let's say, it's expensive, and people aren't really convinced that we want the price to go up. So there's a difference between us getting better prices for our syrup versus just having a level of certainty of what the price is going to be so that we can plan 2 and 3 years out. So I go back to the market order. I think those are the kind of questions that I'd be wanting to ask. Just what does that price profile look like over 5 or 6 years, and the distinction between up and down or steady.
Or able to move product as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at milk is a major market order. The big thing it has done is obviously not price, but the consumption of overall milk in the U.S. has gone up.
There you go. Yeah. Then I was talking to Ira earlier, and I asked that question about if a lot of us are in Vermont. I grew up in Syracuse, so I step away from this. A lot of people in Vermont, think that Vermont's the best, and I won't discredit that. But the question is, if we're trying to move syrup to other places in this country, how much does the Vermont name really resonate? And we were talking about two different things of kind of like, I said, well, is it selling better? And I think it's sort of these two things that happen when you talk about marketing is moving product is different than getting a premium for product. And just moving product is maybe the goal. Getting a premium could be a different goal. So whether it's a Vermont market order or a U.S. market order, I think there's a lot of discussion and dialogue that will have to happen to kind of try to figure out who wants to get what out of it. Does Vermont want to get a premium for market? Does Vermont just want to have recognition so that product flows? But then go to Japan do we really need to try to convince people in Japan that there's 50 different states in the U.S. and that some of the syrup from one state is better than the other? Or do we want just the people in Japan to know that syrup does come from the United States and it's all pretty darn good?
Right.
I don't know. Good question. But if we're going domestic marketing, right, now we got to think about Santa Fe, New Mexico. Do we want to pit ourselves against Wisconsin, Minnesota, and New York syrup? Maybe. How do we feel if that same marketing campaign has to go to Madison, Wisconsin, or Chicago? Are we going to have a competitive advantage in Chicago against Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan syrup? We got to start to figure out where we really think the value proposition is for consumers. And this is where it flips a little bit. It becomes less about us and our own perceptions of ourselves, and it's more stepping into the consumer's shoes and figure out what are their wants, what are their needs, what do they care about. Yes.
Just clarifying, I guess maybe for me the difference between a market order and the Sugar Makers Association that we have now and the role that it would play. I feel like the association is doing a lot of the organizing, promotion, research, helping with research and resources for producers. But what does the market order do differently than that?
Market order creates a sustainable flow of funds to support that work. I'm not exactly sure what supports the Sugar Makers Association. My understanding is it's membership dues, which has been declining actually, because a lot of the larger producers, this is again what I've kind of heard anecdotal, nothing against large producers, but I've heard a lot of the large expansions in Vermont doesn't necessarily reflect increased membership in the Sugar Makers Association. So there could be a distortion now of more product being produced in any state that's necessarily reflection of membership in those associations. But then the assessment would be very much on a product unit basis rather than an individual. So it's a constant flow of money, and then it's to be determined what that money would go for. I think one of the coolest things that happened in the past year is the FDA, the outreach and the response that I would say the Sugar Makers Association and the industry groups collectively said, we are going to lobby. I mean, that's why this is lobbying. This is consumer education / lobbying. We are going to collectively get our momentum in one place, and we are going to share that input to make a change on a policy. And it was super successful. Cheers to everyone that was involved in that. But I think people have looked at it and said, wow, a small industry in New England just got I don't know how many thousands of comments went to the FDA in that process. So I think there's a lot of discussion here about like what's the relevance of the producer association as well. You know, is it holding events like this? Is it lobbying? I don't think the association has the resources to do domestic marketing campaign now. You know, we're talking, that's the difference between a couple $100,000 organization and a couple people and probably a couple millions of dollars to at least like just get some airtime. Great question though. It's kind of like, it's kind of a question.
Market
like-
order is basically a government fee on the production.
Market order is a fee, you could look at it as a government fee, but I think you should step it one time back and say in order for the market order to go in place,
Industry.
the participants in the industry would have to vote by referendum that into place.
Right, yeah.
So it would be voted in place by the people that would be subject to it. It gets the oversight and kind of like branding of the U.S. government, but I think it'd be a bit of a misnomer to look at it as a regulation, especially if all the industry basically says we want this and we want to use this law to do it. And this starts to push a little bit on like the idea of cartels and I'm forgetting the word here. What do you call it when people collusion, like price setting collusion and stuff like that? Creating a mechanism for independent producers to aggregate their power. And you need some U.S. laws to do that, because otherwise it starts to look a little bit fussy, or a little bit weird. Any other thoughts, macro stuff, before we get into cost of production? Yeah.
Well, the other interesting thing is, you know, that you're right, it takes a lot of money to market, and there's no way the organization can come up with that, but there have been some pretty sizable grants given out. I think the ag department got like a $500,000 grant.
Yeah.
trying to market
They got an Acer grant as well. Same cool
so
that we got.
there's some pretty sizable grants out there that could
Yeah.
sort of do the same thing as a market order.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the question of where are we as an industry going to look to for the money to support our continued growth.
And I think the state should be giving sugar makers grant money, because I mean, we're a big part of, you know, of Vermont, you know, so why should we pay as individuals into this market order, you know, use some government money to help us.
That's one perspective. And let's be clear that the marketing is already happening, and it's come. You know, we've deferred that marketing. We've deferred the expenses of marketing, I think, to the bulk buyers and packers. It's built in. You know, it has to be built into their formulas in order to move the product that we provide to them. So the marketing is happening. It's not like it's just gonna it's not like it's not happening. The world is the market is not expanding at 8 to 10% because nobody's investing in it. The question, I think, is really like, should we nudge it to help it grow faster? And then I think there's a question of collectively, do the producers want to have a little bit more input in that marketing? And well, a little bit of pay to play. You know, you put a couple cents per pound in, and you might have some input in how that marketing goes. Yeah.
Just on the making the decision between whether we're seeking increased flow or seeking a price premium as a goal, I think there are some general rules where if your production is unlimited, then you want increased flow because you can always sell more. If your production is finite, then the only way to make money is to seek a price premium. And so as a small state with a finite, like there is an upper limit on if we tapped every single tree or every single tree we're willing to produce, or at a whole bunch of small operations or a handful of really big ones, we're gonna hit the top of what Vermont can produce. So it seems like the long-term strategy would be more in our interest to be a Bordeaux or a Cabernet from France that demands $30 a bottle, as opposed to the same grapes grown in California that's $3 in the box. You know, 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the road, that seems like a winning strategy.
And that's part of the problem of merging with.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say I don't want to. Yeah, that's one way to think about it.
I mean, Vermont syrup is premium. I've been to international syrup tasting contests, and our syrup is a lot better in general than Indiana syrup. Sorry, but they just don't have the right trees. So,
Someone in the back there?
out of those 35 active market orders, has there been like an overall trend on the effectivity of when they have gone into action on those individual crops? Like, has it
Yeah.
consistently boosted that crop, or has it flopped occasionally? and not?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, and I think gentleman over there asked a similar question. I think those are really important questions to ask. Yeah, let's get some customer reviews on this before we buy it. Before we buy it. I don't think you buy a market order and then decide you want to return it like a year or two later. I think that sets like a 20 and 30-year trajectory for an industry. But I bring it up in the sense that this is also not something that would happen in a year or two. I think this is 6 or 10 years of dialogue within the industry to figure out like where would we want to go with this. I think it would take a lot of talking for people to get comfortable with it, so that there wasn't going to be like a backlash if it did get passed. The last thing you want is it to pass by like 55% and then have 45% of the participants seeking other avenues to get around it. All right, so we talked macro. Now and then get to the producer side. From what I've seen working with producers again on their own finances. We talked bulk earlier, and I do think I use bulk as a macro lens, but I don't want to lose sight of the producers and people in the room that are doing a lot of innovative marketing. So I think we need to recognize that aside from just bulk syrup that's maybe perceived as table grade, not that it's only getting sold as table grade. I mean, Bruce said the ingredient market is growing, and he talked to me last week about someone buying maple syrup for dog food, and he's shaking his head just like he was for the pot brownies. But he's like, hey, barrel's a barrel. But what is going on more at the marketing level? There is product innovation, right? We've got infused syrups, we've got maple beverages, we're seeing new formats for lollipops. I haven't seen popsicles yet. If anyone wants to do a maple popsicle, I think that could maybe be pretty cool. So we're seeing product innovation, and then we're seeing differentiation. I'm sure all know this if any of you make your own syrup. People are trying to tell their story, right? Telling your story. I mean, really, we're trying to sell our story. We're not just trying to tell it. But we're trying to tell that and share that with consumers and get some resonation, get some buy-in there. And then there's service. Let's never lose sight of service, right? It's one thing to have the product. It's one thing to have the story. It's another thing to be able to execute the logistics, the orders, the deliveries, the food safety recall that's going to happen at some point, the credits, all that kind of stuff, and keeping the buyers happy so they can move the product through to the end consumer. Just like if you're selling directly to consumers, figuring out that service element so when they get the maple syrup in the mail, they get exactly what they want. Those are all things that are going to continue to contribute to prices. But the bulk trend, what I've seen is there was a pretty good lag when the bulk prices dropped before it hit retail and wholesale. At this point, I think it's clear. Anyone that's retailing or wholesaling syrup is feeling pressure. Not pressure against the big packers, pressure against their neighbor that's now trying to move what was bulk syrup into wholesale accounts. And whether it's pressure on price or just pressure on presence, there are 3 more people knocking on the door trying to sell syrup. So it's getting tighter. And I think it's kind of getting tighter as you move out of the maple region. It maybe gets a little looser, but then you've got a customer education situation. Once you move out of our core area, you've got to start telling people about maple syrup before you sell it to them. Now people know what syrup is, but they've got a lot of options. Okay, we're gonna skip through prices and competition because I want to get some finances. This is pretty repetitive if anyone's seen this or seen those reports in the past, but let's just touch on this. You could still make bulk syrup at a small scale. I think the coolest thing about maple syrup, it can be run as a seasonal business, and I think that's different than dairy farming or other forms of agriculture. You still can figure out a way to compress that production season really tight and manage the woods throughout the year. This is a modern maple operation that I've worked with, 3,000 taps. They're actually pulling $10,000 out a year for themselves by our calculation. I think people are worth time, or their time is worth money, so we build it in. But this is a modern maple operation. This is at least $180,000 worth of investment, not including the real estate. I put a little proxy in there for forest land. It's not perfectly accurate, but in my work, we tend to not deal with forest land acquisition. It's a balance sheet item. It's more of a capital investment than it is an operating cost. Not saying it doesn't cost money to buy land. Just a different formula when we run the calculations. But $45 to $55 a tap investment, not including real estate. That's what we're seeing across the board with modern maple. Okay? You want to put in 1,000 taps, plan on spending at least $45,000 to $60,000 on tubing, machinery, releasers, pumps, a couple snowmobiles, and a sugar house, not including the real estate. You want to put in 10,000, well, we'll get 10,000 taps. So 3,000 taps, you're looking at around 200,000 plus land. You can, however, produce syrup at $2 to $2.15 a pound on 3,000 taps. I've seen it done. You do not have to be 20,000, 50, 60,000 taps to produce $2 syrup. This is a job. This is not a lifestyle sugar house. There are no maple leaves being poured at 11 o'clock at night or whatever your neighborhood drink is that happens late in the sugar house. There's no donuts and pickles in the corner. This is like a working sugar house, and this guy is tired when he gets out of his shift. Small retail, 3,000 taps. Maybe you want to flip it a different way and you want to direct market that syrup. Well, again, I show up and I say, I think you're worth something. I'm going to put a $22 an hour wage on your owner time to market that syrup. And I've seen businesses that really require the cost of about $40,000 to $50,000 in owner draw in order to market 3,000 taps worth of syrup. If you're really going to spend time marketing and keep track of your time, it's going to cost a lot of money. And I think that might even be underestimated a little bit. I'm going to skip through the investment, but I want people to at least see this. Cost of production, including the marketing now. Direct marketing, 3,000 taps. We've seen anywhere from $75 to $90 a gallon, equivalent. Does this person only sell gallons of maple syrup? No, they sell mostly pints, quarts, all sorts of other things. But when you spread it all out, they're going to have to get at least $75 to $90 a gallon equivalent to cover all their costs. Marketing is expensive. Human beings are probably the most expensive part of the maple financial equation. Okay, so we move it up a little bit, and again, this may be a repeat. This is where I get the most concerned. I've seen people with 8,500 to 10,000 taps selling bulk syrup, maybe bulk organic, getting that premium, have done reasonably well over the past several years, or maybe until about 2 years ago. $45,000 draw, getting paid for their time, about $2,500 worth of work. So that's about two people. I'm sorry, that's about one person full-time, or maybe two people, often a husband and wife or partners, that are splitting it throughout the year. Time tracking is a little difficult on maple operation. Some people really love to be in the woods, but we do our best to track how much effort goes in. So, cost of production, $205 to maybe $230 a pound. This is where we're at right now. This is where the tension is for a lot of these, I'll call it ag in the middle, maple in the middle type producers. They need this income. They're relying on this income. They've scaled up. They've invested almost $500,000 in their operation as an owner-operator. That's a lot of money to have on the table. And they're producing around $2 to $230 a pound. They're doing okay. They're around break even though. They're maybe not super profitable, but if it goes back to $220, $225, I think a lot of them are more comfortable. Drops below $205, and there's a lot of folks that are considering exit. A lot of folks that are considering trading in all their stainless steel and selling sap. This is what this looked like a few years ago at $240 a pound. Oh, and 6 pounds per tap as well. This isn't kind of messing around in the woods. This is serious woods management, serious vacuum. 0.45 gallons per tap, 0.5 gallons per tap, 6 pounds per tap. Working hard to get sap out of the trees. And this is what it looked like at $240 a pound. There's that salary, roughly 38 grand a year. They were pulling money, paying for a job that supported their household. And a little bit of profit there, because you got to have profit if you're going to reinvest and keep up. Not just with inflation, but keep up with repairs and new technology, new regulations. They cost money.